This is a short video demonstrating how to create a workflow in Relay, which is triggered by an incoming event. So let's start by logging into Relay, and we will proceed to create a new workflow. We'll call it trigger, and we will copy a simple workflow. So this workflow has one parameter called message param and one step, which takes the message param, and inside it has actually a shell script which calls knee, the tool which is part of the Relay development kit, which you can use to read and write objects inside Relay. In this case, it reads an object called message, and that's the parameter we are interested in. So what happens in this step, in fact, it just basically displays the message. So let's start by saving changes and run this workflow just to check whether it runs. It asks for a message param. Of course, it is hello world. And let's see whether we get the hello world displayed by the step. So clicking on the step and clicking on logs, we should be able to see the output of the step. And we see that the message is displayed. So how can we now trigger this workflow from the outside using an event? For that to happen, we can add a trigger to the workflow. There are different types of triggers, such as webhook trigger or schedule trigger, or like in this case, we're using the push type of trigger. And you can specify a schema. In this case, we just leave it empty, and then you can specify a binding for the trigger. How that works is that in this case, I specify that my parameter message param should be bound to the data object called foo, which means that if I send in my push event, if I send a field called foo, then its value will be passed to my parameter called message param. The interesting thing happens when I save my changes now, because I've added the trigger to my workflow. When I save my changes and I click open the setup pane on the right, I see that I have the trigger information available to me here. First of all, the URL is available, which I should call in order to send the trigger event. And second of all, I have a token specifically generated for me, which will call this specific instance of my workflow using the data I passed to it. To see whether that works, first I should, of course, define the token in my shell. So let's copy paste the token. And now I can use curl to call this endpoint, api-nebula.puppet.com/api/events. And the data should be passed in a data container. And the data item foo, I can give it a value hello trigger world. Let's go to run history here. And let's send the event now. So I receive success true, and what we are hoping to see is that that workflow changes status to in progress and to running. Now we can see whether the second step succeeds, and indeed, the message is hello trigger world. We can also see in the overview of the workflow runs that the first run was started by me, and the second run was started by my push trigger. So we have seen how to create a workflow which is started by an external event.